special Symposium edition of the Seniorship. It's a podcast, as you know, where we explore the big ideas around age, aging, and everything in between. I'm Paul Godwin, a marketer, writer, and customer insights expert, and I'm joined today by two brilliant minds from the Seniorship stable. We've got Tim Arnold, a marketing guru with a sharp eye for trends and human behavior, and Michael McMahon, a former engineer and expert business trainer who brings his practical system thinking lens to our conversations and occasionally pulls us back on track. Today's discussion takes its cue from an article Tim recently read in the New Statesman titled The Aging Revolution, and it has sparked some big open questions about what it really means to grow older in the UK today. And that's exactly what we're going to be diving into. As always, we'd love to hear your thoughts too. You'll find links below, so do get in touch, share your views, or join the conversation. Let's get into it. Tim, what does it mean to age well in today's Britain?
Well, good morning.
Good morning. There you go. I'll give you a difficult one.
I mean, you set such a high bar that I've got to be a guru. I'm not sure. Do gurus go to the toilet regularly, or I mean, what is the definition of a guru? But
they certainly do.
Interesting. What is the definition of living well? Is doing what you can do as well as you can do it for as long as you can. That's my definition, which is one of the reasons why I'm pleased to be part of the Seniorship program, and I think this symposium is a really good idea. We're doing what we can, and we're doing it as well as we can.
Yep.
And I think that leads quite well into the article.
Tim, would you say
the New Statesman?
Yeah, and that's of course what you read the article and you brought it to our attention, and that prompted this discussion. In that article, they talk about a number of things, and they talk about health, but they also talk about independence, and they talk about purpose. And you said, living the way you want for as long as you want, and health is important for that, obviously, but independence and purpose, are they related to health, or are they dependent on health, or is there another angle on that?
My view about that is you can live and will have lived as well as you can and as healthily as you can. However, we all know, those of us who've been around a long time, that one's health and propensity to catch something, have something, do something is actually outside of our hands. So the most important thing for me is actually the opposite of independence. It is do things independently, and I think they're referring to make yourself independent of reliance on others. However, in the yin and yang of that, the most important thing, I think, is a sense of purpose and community. And being old gives you the opportunity to be able to do that, because you've got more time to consider, more time to think, and indeed more time to do things, because you don't have to do other things.
Thank you. Michael, I saw you raise your hand there.
Yes, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned the word purpose, because we often overlook it, don't we? I think it was somebody once said that there are the two important days in your life are one, the day you were born, and two, the day you discover why. And that sounds a bit kind of woo-woo, doesn't it? But I think there's some truth in it, because a lot of us get to retirement age, or let's say official retirement age, and suddenly a lot of things are gone from your life that were there before and which pulled you along to some extent. first of all, status, which for blokes is quite important. It's, you know, a lot of blokes don't handle very well the loss of status that they perceive when they retire, but also the lack of purpose that they got from their job. And so therefore, trying to work out what your purpose is independent of your former job, I think is quite a useful thing and a very important thing to do. And I've heard it said also that one way of defining what your purpose is to work out what it is you're particularly good at. And we're all, you know, average at some things and rubbish at others, and particularly good at one or two things, or maybe more. And if you can work out what it is you're particularly good at and find a way to help other people by doing those things, then that will give you a purpose in life that maybe you never realized you had. And this is kind of on the spectrum between independence and interdependence. And I live in a retirement village, and you guys know this, and I live in a retirement village, and it's defined here as independent living. In other words, it's not a retirement home. It's certainly not a care home, because the people who move in here are in generally good health, as am I. But there's a certain amount of interdependence here. In other words, the fact that here automatically we have a built-in social life. You know, unless you're particularly antisocial here, it's hard to be lonely in this kind of setup. So I'm rambling a little bit. But
sounds like a wonderful cue for a song.
Hang on.
It's hard to be lonely whenever you're together. Hard to be lonely.
Hang on, I've got a keyboard here alongside me, and I'll just So social contact, and then I'll wrap this up. Social contact was said to be one of the key predictors of long life, according to this so-called famous blue zones theory that I think you've heard about. Really, the places on the planet where people tend to live long and healthy lives. So yeah,
right.
So, social life, loneliness, yeah.
Michael, I'm going to stop you. One of the joys of Michael is that he knows a lot of stuff. One of the woes of Michael is that he shares all of it in the same sentence. So occasionally we need him to draw breath. Just to draw breath, because there are a couple of things I think there's a danger of us losing here. And the first one is this thing about blue zones. You've said, which I assume you know. Not all our listeners will know about blue zones. I'll be totally honest and say I have a rough, vague memory of what blue zones are, because we've talked about it before and I've read about it before. Can you just, in 20 seconds, tell us what blue zones are?
They are the places on the planet where it's known from data that exists in public sector that people live exceptionally long and healthy lives, and there are more, well above average number of centenarians, people who live to 100. Those are the zones, and large multifactorial studies have determined that the predictors of this of long life in those blue zones are well above exercise, well above diet, well above alcohol content, well above stopping smoking, all that kind of stuff. Social contact has been shown to be the number one predictor. So, and I really believe that. So yeah, that's what I was talking about with retirement villages. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. And that's where Tim started, which is one of the things about getting maintaining that independence in life. Ties into your idea as well of interdependence. Tim talked of community. So we're hearing that from both sides. Now, just to pull us back to the article briefly, and I know I do have a tendency to, having been a marketing insights guy, to focus in on the raw material as opposed to using it to spark a discussion. But there are a lot of experts writing in that article, and I blame Tim because he's the one who brought it to our attention.
In the New Statesman,
New Scientist, not New Statesman. Yes, it would be very odd if the New Statesman were doing this, but the New Scientist. But Linda Fried, who's a geriatrician at Columbia University, said, we've added years to life, but not always life to years. And I think that sort of ties into what you were both talking about there. And if I can take another question from that as a leap, take that as a leaping off point. You talked about lack of status. I saw Tim nodding to that. I understand that as well. I've seen that so many times with so many people. I think status is part of it, but it does tie into the broader idea of purpose. And the question is this, what would change then in our society? Because I don't think we do this now. If we truly valued the wisdom, experience, and time that older adults can offer, let's call this older adults or seniorship can offer, and we see that our generation, the 60-plus generation, as one of society's greatest underused assets. Is that resonating with either of you?
That is very
yes.
You've had your chance for a minute. It's my turn, Michael. And then I'll go on for an hour and no one will mind. No, my view is, and that's one of the reasons why I'm so keen about seniorship and the symposium, is that I was fed up with my wife buying the Daily Mail and them telling us what you have to do to live a long life. And it was, as far as I was concerned, it was nonsense and had no application to my life and what I was doing, what I was trying to do. And as you know, I'm a lifelong regular drinker, but not a drinker to excess. I use the pub as a place for community. And I've ended up in the local pantomime. I've ended up being a vice president of the cricket club, where I've never ever played cricket. But
Tim,
in reality,
Tim, I'm going to interrupt you there. You've just said you go to the local pub for community and you've ended up in the local pantomime and playing cricket. Did either the local pantomime or the local cricket team request your involvement, or was this just you walking out of the pub into it? Did you just walk from the pub into the pantomime?
No, it was as a result of people I drank with at the pub who said,
I know, I'm teasing you. I know
you are. And but our listeners and watchers may not be aware of how teasable I am.
Yeah.
But anyway, what I would also say about status is actually an important thing about getting old is you have to come to terms with what your status is. And that means I ran a company for a long time. I was president of a rugby club. You can't go strutting around at 80 years of age behaving as that was what you can. You can bring some knowledge and understanding to what the people who are trying to do it are doing, as I've done with the local cricket club. And that's how I ended up being asked to be a vice president. But in reality, you have to come to terms with who you are at this time. And the other side of that coin is, quite simply, and you might want to expand on this a bit later, is that unbelievably one gains a respect just for being old. I walk into the pub and blokes who are sat down in a seat I normally sit in get up and say, "Sorry, Tim, I'm keeping it warm for you." Yeah. I think the Spanish have a word for the seat in the corner of the bar where the old man always sits. I don't know. I don't know anybody Spanish well enough to find that out, but I think it's true.
There is a word, and it's called Carinthia.
Oh, is it?
Is it?
Well, yeah. I mean, I first heard it. Okay, we'll come back after this stops. Can you hear that alarm?
No.
Oh, right. Okay, good. Well, a friend of mine who always sat in the same spot in his pub, he knew some Spanish, and he used to say, "This is a Carinthia. It's my Carinthia." And it's a Spanish word meaning the place in the bull ring where the bull feels secure. He feels safe. He's kind of in the corner Right, I'm going to stay out of the way here. Carinthias, great word.
Very good. Now, did you have anything to say on this about how, whether or not we see old people as a burden, and how do we get society to see them as an underused asset?
Well, I agree with what Tim said about, obviously it depends on the behaviour of the older people to a certain extent, but you can't strut around the place saying, I was X, Y, Z, therefore I'm due respect now. So it's something you earn. But, for example, I know a lot of people of Asian background here, partly because my son-in-law is of Punjabi extraction, although he's born and raised in Britain. And when my daughter married him, that wedding went on for about 3 days. I have never been called sir so many times in my life. So in their culture, and this is something that I think we can learn from Indian culture. In their culture, age is something to be revered. Absolutely is.
Tim,
I as you know, have been mentoring students from the University of Hertfordshire, many of whom were from Indian backgrounds, various parts of India, as well as a smattering of Nigerian. If I can make non-judgmental generalizations, the Nigerians are incredibly positive and very, very friendly and have a very optimistic outlook, right? The Indians are always considering things, taking a long time, and are very, very respectful to the degree that I think it limits their initiative. And I think the Nigerians are too optimistic. And so the good thing about a multilingual interactive society is that everybody finds the level of the society itself, which is actually where we're at. So we are the Nigerians and the Indians of the society of the life we're in. And I think, therefore we have to change our behaviour to fit the roles that we can provide and or look to provide. So that's...
Sorry, I'm a little lost in this discussion. I've got to be honest. I'm not quite sure what point we're making here.
What I'm making is to say,
let's start.
Go strutting around as though I was the boss, as I did when I was a boss. I can only go around being who I am now with the capabilities that I've got now. They still have value.
I get all of that. I wasn't getting the Indian and the Nigerian bit. That was passing me by.
Well, I'm saying I was making generalizations, and I said my experience was that the Nigerians were very friendly, wonderfully positive, always willing, and the Indians in the main were very, very respectful, almost, and I used to say, don't call me sir. We are equal here, right?
Understood.
Oh, I'm sorry, sir. And I said, my name is Tim.
Yeah.
And please call me Tim. It didn't stop them because it was ingrained in the way of behaving. And I'm just saying, as older chaps, we have to learn how to behave as to how we are now in the society in which we find ourselves. That's all.
Yeah. Okay.
Does that make it clear?
Yeah, that does. Although I would also broaden it out and say that's not specific just to India and Nigeria. I mean, I've lectured in universities with multicultural student groups, and Americans, for example, all insisted on calling me sir. And Europeans for whom English isn't a first language insisted on calling me sir, and it would drive me mad. But I think it's a cultural thing that maybe our culture has moved so far away from it.
Yes,
I have a thought about that, and I think it also might be a language thing.
Yes. Yes.
The average Singaporean has a really long word, and the name of a Spaniard tells you their family, their religion, and their location. So, in the sense, you don't need all of that information. And of course, in America, they've all got different names from different locations and mentalities. So it's easier to be polite and not have to spend so much time saying people's names just to say sir.
Yeah.
Or
Okay.
madam.
Yeah, good point.
Okay, I think we
shouldn't be worried about it.
No, that's true. Okay, I think we're moving a little away from age here and looking at how we can have a culture that truly values the wisdom, experience, and time that we can offer. One of the things I think that we are agreed on is you can't tell people to respect it. They have to choose to respect it. And that will only come from being more active in our communities and more productive and more of net contributors to our communities, as opposed to perhaps being dependent on our communities. Maybe the relationship with community has been, we need to support our older people. Maybe it should be, our older people are supporting us, so we need to support our older people. They're contributing, so we need to support them.
What is old? Old is someone who's older than you are.
Yeah, but in this context, we're talking about people over 60. So how do we, Tim and Michael, shift this conversation from burden to asset? And is it totally on us as a generation to do that? Or is it on the state? Is it on the media? Is it on whoever controls the conversations?
No, I mean, number one, it's on you as the individual to live the life you want to do. And that's the point about independence. And actually not live the life that the media or the government is trying to impose on you unnecessarily. Although in a sense we have to live in a society, which means we have to accept given structure of the way society works and operates, because we are part of that society.
And that's a good time to stop. We're going to come back in a minute and we will talk about health. Welcome back to the Symposium with the Seniorship, and we left the last discussion when we were talking about the unrecognized asset, the rich asset that is within the seniorship community, but we also acknowledge that it is beholden on the seniorship community to make their contributions felt, and it is our responsibility to do that. But sometimes we just don't feel up to it. Sometimes we're a little bit weary, we're a little bit tired, and we believe, is it a myth? We believe the myth that age is also about being unwell and being tired. So what we have heard in the New Scientist article, and John Beard, who's the former director of aging and life at the World Health Organization, said health is not a binary state. So you're not either healthy or unhealthy.
No.
It's not that. It's a continuum, and we all move along it. So from the day we're born to the day we die, we're moving along that continuum of the healthy state, right? And we're at different stages of it. So no one is totally healthy and no one is totally unhealthy unless they've passed away, right? So given that, and given that it's a continuum and it's how you live within whatever stage of that state you're at, is it about taking responsibility for managing your own health in the same way as it's about managing your responsibility to manage your contribution to society? Michael.
Yeah, absolutely. I used to live very near a big hospital in Winchester, where I used to live, and in fact, both my daughters were born there. And I was having a conversation with one of the consultants there because at the time I was working for the Stroke Association, and so we were having a conversation about preventative medicine, if you like, really. And what he said, and this was 25 years ago, it stuck with me. He said, you know what? He said, we're going to have a tsunami of cost coming down the road if we're not careful in terms of health in this country, if we cannot persuade people to take more responsibility for their own health. And in other words, what he was saying was the NHS is a fantastic resource. But balanced with that, you've got to say to people, take more responsibility for your health. And some of us do that, some of us don't.
Yeah, it's this expectation that the NHS can help us with everything, because in the old days, they could help us with the major things we wanted them to help us with. Now we say, I go to the doctor and I say, when I stand up, my right knee really hurts and my right ankle is a constant, grind, literally. And he looks at me and he shakes his head and he says, yeah, you're 63. Deal with it. We can't fix it.
Well, I thought a couple of things. The first thing is, when you meet old friends, and if you've been around a long time, a lot of your friends are old because they're friends. One has to avoid what most of us, if you're over 70, you have 5 or 6 of the 10 regular things that you might have. And if your conversation opens with "How are you?" and then you tell them, the time for the conversation is nearly over. So I say, as I think I'm as well as you look.
Yep.
End of story.
Well said.
The other is when the doctor says, inevitably, when you sit in front of him or her and says, well, how are you? I did come up, because I thought about it, was I'm facing my mortality with as much gusto as I can manage at the moment.
Well said.
Yeah.
And that's what sums up my attitude. And the other is, because you've got more time, this is my last point on this, because you've got more time, what is wrong with a fucking afternoon snooze?
Nothing.
Absolutely nothing.
Absolutely nothing. You find your own way of there's a phrase that we've all heard for years: coping strategies, and we have that in the workplace, we have it in our lives, we have it with everything that we touch. Coping strategies. You find your own coping strategies and your way of dealing with things. And I think I'm going to drag us back to this article. What it was about was, if I would summarize the whole thing in a sentence, it's everyone, both the society and the community and the individual, needs to develop coping strategies for this set of people who are aging. So as individuals, we need our coping strategies. Now, pick up on Tim's point, I'm gonna murder this name now. Islena Aranjo de Carvalho, who is the World Health Organization's unit head for aging and health, said we need to stop thinking of our older people as passive recipients of care and start seeing them as active contributors to society. And, if there was going to be something put on the letterhead, it would be that for the World Health Organization. And I think what we need, we should be asking ourselves, are we doing enough to help ourselves stay healthy and enjoy that life? And instead of promoting just longevity, which is what the NHS has been doing historically, and we now have a lot of people who are living longer, but at that end of that spectrum, because we're all on that spectrum, as we said earlier, it's not a binary state, it's this continuum. But at this far end, the end we're at, how do we ensure that we we maintain vitality and well-being in that later life? You know, what do we do about it? And I would take the first thing that the first piece of advice would be what the advice Tim shared, which is don't start every conversation with your list of ailments. You know,
no, particularly. I used to run training courses in Scandinavia in business communication skills combined with English language. And I had a colleague, a Norwegian colleague, who would begin the courses by saying, right, there are two things. Michael will tell you two important things about the English language. First of all, that it's possible to take half an hour to say good morning in English, because the Norwegians are far more to the point than we are. And the second one, which I loved, which is, she said, when English people ask, how are you? They don't really want to know.
No. No,
I have a friend who, whenever I ask him, how are you, he'll say, no worse. And that's great. And that's the end of that discussion. What I'd like to talk about when we get a chance, actually, is the influence of our mental attitude on our physical health.
I will come to that one.
When it's the right time.
Well, no, very, very soon. But there's just one final thing I'd like us to maybe knock about. What would it mean for us as individuals and for communities and the NHS if all of us prioritised quality of life over simply living longer? You know?
Well, one of the thrusting points of the New Scientist article was this concept of well-being in life and living longer. Are you being kept alive, as it were, for a life that has no well-being in it and you don't want to enjoy? I had a conversation the other night, and in fact just popped up in the corner of my screen, is a chap who's just lost his job and he's in a bit of a down. And I said, well, do what you can do. Let's start with your CV. Who are you sending it to? And I said, send me your CV and I'll have a look at it for you. I am not probably going to, I can't change what he's done, but I am at least giving him some help and some reassurance in a way an older person can do. So my view is, and one of the things I said to him is, get on with it. And if you're really down, take any job and work in the place, and they'll soon see how good you are and they'll give you more to do, and that's it. So and by the way, when you get really old, I said, I've probably only got 5 more years of being as active as I'm currently being. So actually, carpe diem, let's get on with it.
Yeah.
Yes.
But
yes.
And also in that thought and acceptance of that thought is, I'm probably a bit fed up with thinking about living healthily. I want to live well. And that counterbalance between do what's healthy and do living well, that compromise is an important part to come to. I don't want to do anything that gets me too fat, or I don't want to do anything that gets me too pissed. But I do want to go and have some nice meals with friends and go visit and whatever. So I think that balance is achieved mentally the older you get.
I think that's very important. And a thought's just occurred to me on that. And it's this. When the NHS came in, it was such a brilliant thing. It still is a brilliant thing, right? It helps so many people, all of us, you know, for all our moans about having to wait for an hour or only being able to fix an appointment before 11 o'clock, as we were talking about earlier. For all of these little gripes, it is still a brilliant asset and resource, and one that we perhaps underappreciate. However, there was talk in the 80s of the nanny state, and I don't particularly want to go there because that's a very loaded statement, but I want to just sort of mention it to get it out of the way. What I do want to talk about is the idea that the NHS is a panacea and can help everything. Whereas we are, the counterpoint to that is we are almost abandoning our own intuition about our own bodies and our own lifestyle and our own life. We read something that says we should or shouldn't do this. 5 things you've got to eat, 10 things you should do every day. You've got to walk 10,000 steps. You've got to walk 7,000 steps. Apparently, 7,000 is the new 10,000. You shouldn't be eating after 8 o'clock. You shouldn't be eating outside a 16-hour window or whatever it is. And all of this stuff. There's a whole list of things we could or shouldn't do. We've all been through the rocky road of you shouldn't eat fat, it's no good for you, you've got to eat fat, you need it for this, that and the other. You shouldn't eat carbs, you should sensibly eat carbs. And offline,
and what about sugar, Paul?
I was about to say offline, we should or shouldn't have sugar in our coffee. You know, we don't know. In the long term, everything we know could turn out to be wrong. Who knows? The planets may even revolve around the sun. You know, who knows? When I think back, and the point to this is our own intuition, I look back on my children when they were very young. And as a child in the very early 60s, mid 60s, I was denied, as many of us were, sweets. You got your pocket money off your grandmother and your grandfather or your mum and dad, and you ran down the shop, you bought yourself 2 ounces of sherbet lemons or 4 ounces of gobstoppers or whatever it was, right? And that was
Pineapple Rock.
Pineapple Rock, you know, whatever. You had these things, sherbet pips, licorice, you know, the whole thing. When our children were born at the turn of the 80s and the 90s, we offered them, sweets were available. They weren't denied. They weren't forced on them, but they weren't denied. You know, people would bring them, they were there were sweet things in the house. We were lucky as a kid, we had rich tea biscuits, you know, and they were rationed, you know, within the household. But my eldest son, I remember taking him home one night, aged about 5, and I said, we're going to the shop, who wants what? Do you want sweets? One of them wanted some sweets, but the elder one said, oh, Daddy, please, can I have a cucumber just for me?
Ooh.
Right.
Wow.
And his favorite snacks were cucumbers and red peppers, right, sliced up. His body was telling him that's what they wanted. When I would give them a cold plate on a Friday night as a treat before the Disney cartoon on telly and we'd eat in front of the TV, it would be, they'd eat different things at different times because their body was telling them what to eat and what not to eat. And they have far healthier eating habits as adults now than I do, you know, because they were given that choice and they listened to their bodies. Tim, do you listen to your body?
I agree with you, but I was brought up that until I was 11, you couldn't have any sweets because you had ration books.
Yeah.
And actually, probably the wider point is that with the austerity after the war, that we were very, very fortunate to have the most fantastic socialist government that built the motorways, built the infrastructure, and created the framework for society we've got now. As a wonderful democracy, we voted them out and got back the aging Churchill who was over the hill, because that socialist government was so selfish in making sure it did things not for the individual but for the society as a whole.
Okay. There is a danger you've just lost us. There's a danger you've just lost us half our audience, Tim.
Oh, well, sorry. Well, if we have, good. But no, the reality is now it's time, because the point I was going to make is society was much healthier. We were slimmer and fitter. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the self-indulgence and society has grown up to be more independent because of the digital world, and everything is more accessible. So you've got this contradiction of multitude of offerings, everything done, and a digital world that imposes its own constrictions. And one of them, by the way, are lists. Google search engines 10 years ago used to search for sites that had a list of 10 things and show them more prominently. So in a sense, society has been changed by the way it communicates. And I think we're on the cusp of that changing again.
Okay.
Wealth in and of itself does not give happiness.
No,
and
too
I've
much
just
choice.
read some research, actually in my wife's Daily Mail at the weekend, that said the University of Columbia in Canada researched people's attitudes when they were given lump sums of money. And most of them used them to help their family, to invest in society, and to do things which were experiences, not assets. Because assets bring their own responsibility, don't they? So there's a change in the way coming now about the importance of living a happy life, and wealth. One of the ways you could look at wealth is a wealth of happiness.
Yeah. Okay, Michael.
I like what Tim said about the fact that, when he and I were growing up, because we're a bit older than you, Paul. So Tim and I were growing up at a time when there was rationing. So in other words, sweets were something that was scarce, and therefore that made them attractive. And I, to this day, still have a sweet tooth. Now, you mentioned your kids and their food choices now, Paul, and it's the same with mine. I mean, I have two daughters, one of whom is still a chocoholic as she was when she was younger, but the other one, the younger one, no, she eats healthily. She does, just not because she feels she ought to, just because she prefers savoury things. And so, guess what? We're all different.
Yeah.
So listening to our bodies.
Yeah, just to wrap that up, three things. First of all, you two are a bit older than me. Okay, all right, we'll use the word bit. The second thing is...
Yes, you behave yourself, young man.
The second thing is my two... It's not that they particularly choose to eat healthily, it's they just do. They just do, and it's nature to them. They don't eat rubbish, either of them, and it's quite incredible. And the third thing is, it's this whole thing about. I mean, the point I was trying to make, maybe I failed, but the point I was trying to make was, I think we've almost lost the skill of listening to our bodies, because we are inundated with so much information, including in the New Scientist, but also on TV, whether it's Loose Women, whether it's the news, whether it's chat shows, whether it's podcasts like ours, whether it's your wife's Daily Mail, that are always telling us that we should be doing this, that, the other. There's so much information that we're confused and we don't listen to ourselves. We all know what we should be. If we were left on our own without any external stimuli, we would know what's good for us to eat. We would listen to our body and go, that's what we should be eating.
I know that having a doner kebab can have unintended consequences in the rear end.
Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, time for a break. Let's have maybe a toilet break. And we'll be back. We will be picking up on Michael. I haven't forgotten, Michael mentioned mental health. We'll do that in the final section. Thank you for watching the first couple of parts of this podcast. For technical reasons, we've had to make a split here, and so this is the end of the first part of this podcast, and we'd ask you to go to part 2, which should appear in your menu. Thank you.